Hello, and welcome to the Core Preservation Week webinar on how to implement sustainability in your facility. I'm Shelby Strummer, a member of the Core Preservation Outreach Committee, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Our presenter today is Christopher Cameron. Christopher is a sustainability preservation specialist and certified energy manager who joined the Image Permanence Institute, IPI, in 2013. He frequently consults with collecting institutions to provide advice on managing and operating mechanical systems to achieve the best possible preservation of collections with the least possible consumption of energy. He has an MS in Communication and Media Technologies from Rochester Institute of Technology. Prior to his work at IPI, Chris worked at a facility as a facility manager for 12 years and is certified in project management certification from International Facility Management Association and in HVAC Systems by Energy Service Company. Chris was a recipient of the 2021 Champion of Sustainability Award from RIT. A few logistics for today's presentation. All attendees are muted to prevent background noise. You can utilize the Zoom chat function to comment or communicate with other attendees, but please use the Q&A box if you have any questions for our presenter or need technical support. We can only minimally monitor the chat. Our primary focus is to monitor the Q&A box. We'll have time for questions after the presentation. You may also comment on today's presentation using Twitter. The hashtag is CORECE 2022. We do not monitor the Twitter feed during the presentation, so if you have questions for our presenter, please type them into the Zoom Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording and presentation slides shortly after the presentation concludes. CORE is committed to providing a harassment-free environment for everyone, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, physical appearance, ethnicity, religion, or other group identity. To that extent, all webinar participants, including speakers and attendees, must comply with the CORE Statement of Conduct. I will drop a link into the chat now. Please contact me through private chat or email jreese@ala.org if you experience or witness any violations of the code. And now, here is Christopher. There'll be a slight delay while we change presenters.
All right, everyone can hear me. I want to thank everyone for coming to the presentation today. My name again is Christopher Cameron. I'm going to be going over how to implement sustainability in a collections facility, kind of a 30,000-foot overview of implementing some of these sustainability strategies, looking at your facility, some of your collections, looking at your data and your mechanical system, getting an idea for what your collection space may be capable of. Coming at you today from the Image Permanence Institute. If you're not familiar with IPI, it is an academic research center at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Lab has been in existence for about 35 years now. Rochester being the home of Kodak, the lab began its work doing a lot of research into film preservation, motion picture preservation, and has branched out a number of other aspects. This is me, Christopher Cameron. I'm a Sustainable Preservation Specialist. I am a member of the Environmental Management team here at IPI with my coworker, Kelly Krish. Again, I was a facility manager for 12 years, certified in HVAC systems. So I kind of represent the mechanical systems in the facilities and what they're capable of. My coworker, Kelly, looks at the she's a preventive conservation specialist. She looks at what the collection needs are. So the two of us, when we're on projects, looks at what the collection needs are, what the mechanical systems are, and where that happy medium lies for everything. So we're going to go through. Please hold all your questions to the end. You can submit them in the question and answer bar. We'll address those at the end, and then we'll, hopefully kind of cover everyone's concerns, topics, or queries. Most of the material we'll cover today, or I'll be explaining, are in one of two guides that were produced by IPI. The first, the guide on your left, the green guide, IPI's Guide to Sustainable Preservation Practices for Managing Storage Environments, was produced maybe about 10 years ago. And it basically is a lot of how to really set up data monitoring, how to go through your facility, how to assess different aspects of your collection spaces. And the blue guide, the IPI's methodology for implementing sustainable energy saving strategies. The blue guide on the right is a guide that we produced just a year or two ago, about 3 years ago. And basically is a simple walkthrough of your how to assess your collection spaces, your facilities, how to really go through and learn how to implement those strategies. Both of these are free downloads at IPI's website. We'll have, you can go to imagepermanencinstitute.org, and the publication section will have these available there. So I'm going to start off with a quick poll. I want to ask everyone, are your collection spaces purpose-built? What was the current use? Do you know if your buildings were built for a specific reason, for a specific design? Give everyone a chance to enter this. All right, looks like we got most responses in. I'll share those with everyone. So pretty good mix there. Yes or no's. So the reason we asked this is a lot of the collection spaces that we see that when we do these projects are not purpose-built. So purpose-built space is great. You design it for what your collection needs are, and you're good to go from there. But what if it's not? What if your collection space was designed for another use? Knowing what that space was designed for is critically important. There's a number of projects we've worked on. That list below is, excuse me, a pretty legitimate list of things that we see that were once a collection space of some sort. A roller skating rink, car dealerships, janitors' closets, you name it, we have seen collection spaces that had another life. And with all those come different issues or problems. If you take a car dealership as an example, that car dealership was basically meant for human comfort. It didn't really have another goal in mind. And they take that car dealership, they move in collections, and they normally, to save money, will not change out mechanical systems. And when they do that, you have a system that was meant to do human comfort that is now trying to do collections. If it's a general population, general collection, that's great. But if you're a special collection, that's not so great. You can't achieve a great quality collection environment with that system. Similarly, you look at the janitor's closet. What conundrums can come with that? We have a janitor's closet. The biggest problems with that janitor's closet are the drains and the water supply lines. If those still exist and we don't remove them, we can have other issues. Simply, the drains themselves in the floor can be passed for pests or other issues. And I have seen, as a former facility manager, seen pests come out of drain lines. It's not a pretty sight. And same with the water supply lines. If they're not closed off or sealed completely, then they can lead to moisture issues in the space, both of which we've seen within that collection space. So it's good to know what that space was, so you can really get an idea for what potential issues you may face, or really what problems may arise, or what may be your limitations for that space. All right, another thing to understand, once you understand the building's what its past use was, how are we currently using that space? Here we just have a basic, it's a fire exit map that was used. And we took that, just laying out where the spaces are. Where are my offices? Where are my collections? Where are the public spaces? Getting an idea for where the current spaces are, and overlapping that with, if you're working with your facilities team, the duct layout or the supply zones for the HVAC can really help drive home, where am I trying to achieve collections environment? Where am I trying to achieve human occupancy environment? And where am I aiming for a mixed condition, which becomes another problem? Am I trying to do human comfort and collections comfort off the same mechanical system, which really can be a big energy hog when trying to achieve those conditions? Another major factor when you look at your collection space are the policies and procedures that we implement. I can have two identical facilities built, literally same blueprints right next door to one another, but the policies and procedures that are implemented in those facilities will cause different energy usage and environmental signatures between the two spaces. Basically start, what set points do we use? If one building's looking for 70 degrees and 50% relative humidity, and the other is looking for 65 degrees and 40%, then clearly, obviously, that's a major difference in the energy. But even our occupancy, in a few slides, I'll have an example of how occupancy is going to play a factor. And it can significantly affect both your relative humidity and the temperature in a space, depending on the amount of people that are in there. And even the hours that we're running with that. So policies also are another major factor. One of the policies I have here is open door policy. Our university is a great example of this. Our library here on our university campus had a special collection. The special collection was trying to keep a very cold space, about between 60, 65 degrees, depending on the season. And it was an enclosed space within the library. Well, they wanted to be more inviting to visitors and get a lot of people to come in and look at it. So they propped the doors open during open hours for people to come in and look. The problem was the general collection was operating about 70 degrees. So that cold condition that they were making for the special collection was being lost with those open doors. So it became a big a waste of energy to keeping those doors open, trying to create an environment that you're just literally blowing out the front door. And your operational procedures. Lights on do play a factor. I tell everyone you're going to pay twice for lights, and I can give an example for that. You're going to pay once to operate the lights and once to remove that heat. And I got a graph a little bit later that will show how lights play a factor within your collection space as well. So the occupancy, understanding the occupancy of a space is great. The occupancy of the space, it will be available in your data. When you look at some data, the data can definitely show you when people come, when people go, when they arrive and turn lights on. And it's good to know not just what those schedules are, but where we have people within the space. Getting occupancy within collection space can be bad, because when we're trying to achieve a nice, cool condition within a collection space, the minute we have human occupancy in there, we're satisfying we're trying to appease the human occupancy over the collection. So people tend to win over that. So we want to get an idea for what our occupancy is in that building. So here's the graph that I was discussing. So when we look at occupancy, when it comes up on our data, here you see this fingerprint. You'll get this Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then it's flat lines over the weekend. So we'll get to see that data. And if you really were to zoom in on this graph, you'll see that the temperature goes up or starts to climb about 8 o'clock in the morning, and this drop down happens around 5 o'clock, the end of the day. So it typically is people coming in, turning the lights on, taking their seats, and just occupying their office space, and then people going home and slowly leaving one at a time, and the temperature comes back down. So that occupancy has an impact. It has about a 3 to 4 degree load within that room itself, just people coming in and coming to work. One of the things that I said this about a second ago, we want to make sure we're keeping those collection space and human occupancy spaces separate. We have seen, sadly enough, we were on a project where there was gutting an institution straight to the studs and making a really high quality, almost vault type space, so that they can really use cold temperatures and control the space and use less energy. And then they put a staff member in there. And then once that staff member occupied that space, all the efforts they went through for the envelope, for the building, for the mechanical system, almost vanished, because we're now satisfying human occupancy over the collection. So we want to make sure we're keeping those, we're trying to keep people out of the collection space as much as possible, to keep human, like long-term occupancy, out of the collection space as much as possible. So one of the biggest, if you're looking at your facility, the biggest impacts is going to be from your building envelope. The envelope condition is going to affect your HVAC operation. You're going to spend more if your building is leaky, if you have drafts within your facility, you're going to spend more money trying to compensate for that loss of condition. You also can get complaints from staff or visitors about a sense of well-being. They can feel breezes. They feel the air feels heavy and damp. You'll get complaints like that if you have a poor building envelope. Building envelopes issues, they can be difficult to fix or retrofit. There's sometimes the belief from administration that the current system works. We don't have any problems. We don't have any complaints. It's fine the way it is. And sometimes that's a hard hill to climb, and getting some good data can really compete with that mindset. And also the changes to the envelope can just really be expensive. If you have a poorly insulated building and you have some thermal bridging, which I can show you in a minute, fixing that thermal bridging in some circumstances can be a very expensive endeavor and might not be worth it for some to want to go through. If you're looking at a new building or new construction, it's really important to make sure you really address that envelope and get the type of protection, the type of building envelope, insulation, vapor barrier that you really would like to see for your collection space. A good way to not only assess your collection space, but also to assess other aspects of your facility is using an infrared camera. Years ago, infrared cameras cost thousands of dollars and literally $5,000, $10,000. Thanks to technology, there are cheap. This camera here is about $700-ish if you buy it through Amazon. There are smaller, cheaper versions from other companies. There are even small infrared cameras that can really just plug into the bottom of a cell phone. So you can buy $100 adapters that can plug into your cell phone. The only thing to be aware of those is those will kill your cell phone battery very fast. But they work just as well as this infrared camera here, and they're good for assessing your facility. And some of the things you can see with your facility are, possible invisible heat loads within your space, moisture issues. An infrared camera from one of the scientists on our university told us can see 1/8 of an inch of moisture, basically an 1/18 of an inch of moisture, basically like a sheet of paper thin layer of moisture. And it's something we've tested here on campus using filter paper. The infrared camera could see the water on the paper, even though it wasn't visible to the eye. So they're really good at seeing moisture issues, possibly in walls or in ceilings. Looking at missing or damaged insulation, malfunctions within your HVAC system, malfunctioning steam traps. They'll come up really hot spots, same with bad electrical connections, or even if you have solar panels, they're good for identifying those as well, damaged solar panels as well. So the image on your right is an example of a poor, a window failure, if you will. This is from a vault that we had worked in. The vault was about 60 degrees. The windows had been sealed up and properly sealed up. They were covered with insulation and wood and metal and every layer that you're actually supposed to do. They were covered perfectly by all intents and purposes. However, over time, that material did fail. And as that material failed, it wasn't re-inspected or looked at. And when we went in with the camera, we were just assessing the space and we caught one of the windows. And there you can see we're trying to hold about a 60-degree condition in the space. And that heat coming through that window was about 90 degrees. And it was a cold and rainy day that day. So just that the heat that was left from the windows there heated up that space and was relaying into the collection room. So also using the same infrared cameras, we can identify heating issues. So we're looking at a collection space. This collection space was trying to condition to about 65 degrees. And the supply ducts to this room came from one air handling unit, 2 different ducts. And the ducts would have individual reheats on them. One of these reheats for this space failed. So if you look at the duct on the right, it had failed, it turned off entirely and was putting out 57-degree air. The duct on the right was trying to compensate and putting out 119-degree air. So it's one of those scenarios where we couldn't see with the naked eye. We're also about 10 feet up from the ground. So unless you were directly in front of it, you couldn't tell that this was what was happening, but we were able to see it with the infrared camera. The rest of the room felt comfortable because it was superheating one side of the air, or really overheating one side of the air to compensate for the cooling of the other. And that air was just mingling in the space. We couldn't see this essentially major energy inefficiency and a potential conundrum. If there's boxes that are too close or stacked too closely to the vents on the left, then that cold, damp air could blow on the materials and could possibly lead to mold, which we've seen happen. Another thing you can use these cameras for is identifying phantom heat loads in your collection space. We've all had that statement, there's a warm area, there's a warm zone, there's a warm spot, there's, this aisle's warmer than the next aisle. And this has come up a number of times. And again, we're in a room, we're trying to aim for, 65-ish degrees within this space. And one section of the room was fairly warm as you walk through it. And using the infrared camera, we find this line which runs parallel across the space. And we go through, we look at the blueprints for the facility, and we identify that the steam heating for the building runs directly under that. So what we had was the actual steam lines running through the boiler room were heating the floor from below, causing this warm spot that's to occur kind of across the collection space. And by warm spot, we were probably about 72, 73 degrees. So 5 degrees-ish warmer than the rest of the room in that general area, just because of the steam heat below the floor. Another thing, the last thing actually that I have here for using an infrared camera is thermal bridging. It's something that happens in a number of institutions, similar to the way a heat sink would work on a computer. So thermal bridging is typically the exterior of your building will heat up. When that exterior heats up, it causes the metal studs. Most commercial buildings will use metal studs in construction. The metal studs will heat up, and that heat can relay through the structure into the space itself. So both of these spaces, we're trying to be conditioned to about 60 degrees. And in both scenarios, the incident on the left is actually the main beams. This is the southeast. The structure got really hot on the outside. And those are the main structural beams that we're heating up in the space. And you can see, we're trying to do 65 or 60-ish degrees, and we're about 75 in some areas where those beams are. And the image on the right, again, we're doing 60 degrees, and the sun heating the exterior of the building, heating these up to, 75, 70, or 74, 75 degrees. One of the things we want to consider is, this does create spots for issues where, localized microclimates or heating. But one of the other issues that we could face with this is the exact opposite. Here we have the walls getting heated up because the sun beating on them. We have seen a number of instances, and I can actually probably tell you about 3 or 4 on the projects we've worked on, where the literal opposite of this has happened. We're in a location, say in New York City, it's very cold outside in the wintertime, and it causes, instead of localized bars of heating, we'll have localized bars of cooling. And these can tend to be 10 to 15 degrees colder than the room. And when you have a warm room, you're humidifying. There has been scenarios where there's condensation that has occurred on these studs, and potentially has led to, has led to mold in a number of circumstances. So getting an idea, is there thermal bridging in your institution, can be very useful to not only identify microclimates, but potential issues like the mold that could have occurred. Another thing we want to talk about or look at, potential for air leaks within our facility, going back to this building envelope, looking for gaps around doors or windows. Do we have any leaky windows, leaky doors within our facility? This garage door that you see here on the right, that's actually from a collection space we've worked in. There was no break wall. There was no separating wall between this. This was not an ante-room. This was the actual garage door on the collection space. About 10 feet away from this door were the collections themselves. And, we have here the holes in the facade. If you look under this door, there's daylight on either side. There's some daylight on the bookshelf, on the shelf here. That is actually from a ceiling to floor gap, which you could actually fit your hands in between the garage door and the wall. So it's something we really want to keep an eye on. Do we have a scenario like this where we're leaking air into the building? And it's something we really don't want, not only because we're getting that unconditioned air, it can bring pollutants, you can bring in pests, you definitely can see rodents. The garage doors tend to be a bigger problem because of the way they're designed. It's hard to seal them. And in a case where we were recently, we found a garage door that couldn't even close all the way and was about 3 inches off the ground. So that's just a highway for whatever insects would like to come in, or pests. And it all comes down to room pressurization is going to play a huge factor in this as well. So when we discuss room pressurization, we really want to see a positive or neutral pressurization to a room, not negative. And one of the ways we can test this is using just a simple Kleenex. If I'm ever on site at a project, I always have a pocket full of Kleenex. I don't have a cold with me. It's one of the best tools we can use for checking airflow within a room. And one of the ways we can use this to test the airflow, even in your own collection space, is to take that simple Kleenex. And if you go to the door, the main door in the collection space, and open it anywhere from an inch, half inch to an inch, and just hold the Kleenex in the gap. If the Kleenex were to pull out of the room, that room is positively pressurized. That means the room is blowing up like a balloon and pushing air out, which is a good sign. We don't want to see it, it doesn't have to be like a wind tunnel blowing it really hard. We just want to see just a gentle pull out. Or if the Kleenex doesn't move at all, that's a sign that there's neutral pressurization within that space, still pretty good. If the Kleenex pulls back in, that's a sign of negative pressurization. That means that your air handling unit is drawing what they call a negative and pulling air in. It could lead to things like, again, pollutants or unconditioned air for that space being drawn in and causing other issues. So again, positive or neutral pressurization for those collection spaces. So when you look at your building itself, some other questions to ask your facility staff, some questions to throw to them. And I feel there's a number of these are really good. First, how old is the building? It doesn't hurt to know that. Getting an idea for the age of the building can let you know potentially some of the building techniques that may have been used or some of the issues that may have faced. You may find out that one section of your building is 1938, the next section is 1950, the next section is 1970, and all of those can play a factor in, different mechanical systems, different building designs, different envelopes. Each one of those has pluses, minuses to them. Have there been any renovations? When? By whom? Renovations are a huge hurdle for a number of spaces, particularly with museums, but for other institutions as well. Typically, when renovations are a problem, it's because walls have been moved just, well, we're going to make this a gallery or this a space. And what happens when we move those walls, we can separate an air conditioning zone. And we could have a large room that was conditioned by one unit, one thermostat, but then we throw a wall up in the middle, and now two rooms are conditioned by the same unit, but with one thermostat. And you could have one room being colder than the other because the thermostat doesn't know how well it's conditioning and just cause other problems like that. So renovations can play a major factor in that. Finding out some biggest issues in the building. These are all good questions to sit down with your facilities person. You don't have to ask them all, but this should be a starting point. Hey, what are the priorities for equipment repairs or replacement? And that's a good question to ask as well, because it'll help you understand when something breaks in your facility, what's the likelihood that that is going to be replaced. If you're in an older structure, you may not have a brand new facility. You may have a historic structure. What does that mean for you? There's still some other things that we can look at in that for older buildings. One is restoring or mimicking natural functions. When a lot of times when the old timers had constructed these buildings, one of the things they did was they had a natural flow to them. They designed the buildings so that they could breathe in a specific way. We've seen buildings in South Carolina with vents underneath them so that they could be a form of natural air conditioning. I live in an old farmhouse, and the farmhouse was designed with the first floor has 9-foot tall windows that are double hung. And the intent was if the wind is blowing east to west, then on the east side, you open the low window so you can bring in the cool air. And on the west side, you drop the high window so you can push the warm air out. And it was just a natural function. It's the best they could do at the time to create airflow throughout some of these old buildings. So we want to try and restore some of those functions. So a lot of time, once we seal these buildings up, we create different types of problems within them. We also want to control moisture loads at their source. If we have leaks, roof leaks, water leaks, we want to address those so that they don't become a bigger problem down the road. Using outside air appropriately, we want to condition if we're using the natural functions, we want to make sure we're not going crazy using too much outside air. There is that happy medium to everything. And make sure if we have mechanical cooling in these buildings that the set points are not acting against, let's say the goals, but even just the building itself. We don't want to over humidify an old building because we can drive moisture through the brick or through the structure and cause other issues. We want to keep things within a logical mindset. And if necessary, using microclimates. There are times when microclimates can be used strategically to help condition a space properly. So understanding your mechanical system, we're going to be going through a couple different, going through a quick overview of mechanical systems. So when we talk HVAC, it's your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So when HVAC is any mechanical intervention to condition air to a preferred temperature or relative humidity. Here is a basic overview opened up. In about 2 slides, you'll see a similar unit closed, but this will at least give you an idea of what one looks like open if you haven't truly seen one. So there's the return here. The air would just come in here. This is the humidifier. It would humidify the air. This V-shaped system right here would be the air conditioner. So if the air needs to be cooled, it'll occur here. The next stop, you can kind of see there's a coiled heater right here. This is where we heat the air, and then right up to the fan and back out into the room. Everything on the front side of this here are just the brains of the operation. So this is a very basic cut down view of what this air handling system will look like, and how it functions. So one of the most important statistics I can leave you with is right here, well, not leave you with, but hand you right now, is an air conditioning system designed before the first modern oil crisis in 1971 were not designed with energy conservation in mind because fossil fuels were plentiful and inexpensive. And for a number of institutions, library or museums that were built before 1980s, even before the 1970s, this is incredibly true. I have been on almost 60 projects for our institution. And of those 60 projects, most were constructed pre-1970, which means they have older air handling systems, which means were designed to be energy inefficient, not on purpose. It's just the mindset that they were in at the time. And we have seen some air handling units going back to, I believe, the oldest Kelly and I have seen was early 1950s. That's still in use by an institution at this time. So there's a good chance that your air handling system may be old. Does that mean it is no good? It actually doesn't. There's some of those systems could still be optimized or can be modified so they can be optimized. And this is the questions. Can that current system be used better than we're currently using it? Because the system wasn't designed to be energy efficient doesn't mean that we just throw it away. There may be ways to lower the temperatures that are used. Sometimes these units were over designed. They were designed to go above and beyond, and we find that components have been changed out over the years, or the system has been modified. It's already, and there's a lot of capabilities there. Can the system control dew point? This is an incredibly critical point. If you are anywhere, probably outside of the Southwest, if you have hot and humid summers or hot and humid months in your region, then controlling dew point in those hot and humid months is your most important function. When you look at relative humidity, that's where we want to look at. In the dry months, we want to keep relative humidity under control, because in the summer months or in the hot and damp months, we're trying to control to a dew point, and then from that dew point, we can regulate the relative humidity. But in the winter months, because we have to humidify, we want to look at controlling that relative humidity. So there's the two different control points there. And can we even implement energy saving strategies with the current system? So before we talk about any of that, one of the things I want to drive home support for anyone is one of the best ways of saving energy is not reducing maintenance. That's one of when I took my CEM course, we had a whole section that we went through about just simple, most of the problems that we see, and this is true even from the projects that we work on here through IPI, most of the projects we see are not really the fault of an old system, and they can be, but a lot of times its maintenance has just been cut back to a point where they're reactive, not proactive. And things have been changed over times or adjusted, and they're just running at the best they can. And it starts to cost more money when you function that way. And when budgets get cut, or when budgets get tight, one of the first things to get cut is maintenance. I will support anyone if you're finding yourself in that conundrum. You want to back up to, hey, we want to make sure we keep maintenance because we want to make sure we stay on top of this so we don't have problems. I'd be happy to do my best to support anyone from that position. Maybe give our own experiences or findings to whatever administration, say, hey, typically when we see a maintenance cut, that tends to be a onset of other problems to the institution. But if your system can't be upgraded, you find yourself in a scenario where it is time to replace. Replacement of HVAC systems are expensive. It's usually kind of the last ditch effort. Something we don't want to jump to, but you need to make a good argument for replacing that unit. Being sure, partner with your facilities team. Make sure you're working together for that. A good argument is going to benefit both sides. You're going to have energy saving that's going to benefit facilities. You're going to have an improved collection environment that's going to benefit the collections. And even once we're there, we can, get the right system. We can implement some energy saving strategies as well to further reduce some energy. You want to make sure you have a good argument as well, because replacing that system has to be cost effective. Depending on your organization, the payback requirements from administration can be as low as 3 to 5 years, or can be as high as 5 to 7. So we want to make sure we're making a good argument as to what we're doing. And there are definitely a series of grants available that you can look into as well through IMLS or NEH that possibly that can possibly pay for some of those upgrades. So we're going to get into some data loggers, eClimate Notebook. Those of you not aware what eClimate Notebook is, it's software that we use to perform some data analysis. Before I get into that, I'm going to put out my next question. So do you currently have an environmental management team at your institution? All right. So we got a pretty good response from everyone. I'll share the results here. So basically, we see no from about 60%. That's a pretty significant number, because when it comes to creating our environment or fixing our environment, even managing it, one of the best things we can have is that environmental management team. That environmental management team could be administration, or should be have a member of administration, a member of facilities, even if you have an HVAC contractor, different members to represent different aspects of your facility, whether it's the management or the collections or the operations, to help if there's a problem, either if it's funding or maintenance, they can have a say in the matter, but also identify issues that you may not be aware of. A heating coil went down, and that's why you see a spike in data. It's good to have a facilities person say, hey, on the 12th, that was our cooling coil failure. That's why you see this. So there's some quick things we want to cover when we look at environmental monitoring. We want a full year of data. We want to make sure we're looking at all the seasons and how they play out. And you want to make sure that you're getting the support of everybody. So make sure everyone's included if you're looking at data, and try and do maybe every other month realistically for a meeting to sit down with everyone, make it a half hour, and just go through data for like first thing in the morning, just so everyone's on the same page, because building that awareness and understanding of your facilities is the first step to understanding what energy saving strategies can be implemented. So I'm going to go through a couple quick examples here of what you would see and what they mean. So if we're doing a good environmental analysis, some of the things we can find are like this: excess moisture in a duct line. So here we have 2 supply ducts, 1 air handling unit, 2 separate supply ducts serving 2 galleries. Here we see the temperatures look identical, so that tells us everything is fine. However, we get some data monitoring, and we see that there's a 10-degree dew point difference, which is significant when we're looking at the same air handling unit with no downstream equipment. So that tells us there's a major problem within this. And that tells us there's significant moisture load in a different section of the building. So we want to work with our facilities and find ways to address this. In this scenario, granted this is a museum, they had a butterfly garden, and a supply duct was leaking humid air into the ceiling and dumping that humid air into one of their galleries. So we want to make sure that, that we address that. And here you can see this is when we found the issue and began to correct that. So now everything starts to function as it should. So I also discussed earlier that you're going to pay twice for your lighting, once for the actual kilowatts to light the space, and once for the energy you're going to remove. And this is an example of that. Here we have a reading room. In a library, the lights are on 365 days a year. They come on with a timer. So here you see that on-off function, the on-off function going across the day. And there's, the added energy that we're using for the lights and the heat from the lights into the space that we have to remove. So, can we get those lights on time, or do we have to have the lights on a Sunday, or maybe even over holidays when students aren't there? Is there something we could do to modify that schedule so that we can reduce the energy consumption and reduce the electricity we're using for the lights, as well as the electricity or the heat to remove that heat, the heat removal, sorry. Another graph we have here is heat load within a collection space. So putting data loggers within an air handling unit is something we typically do. So here I have a data logger inside a supply air, down on the bottom, the teal line, inside the space, which is the orange line. They both agree, which is exactly what I would expect. But the data logger within the air handling units at the return shows me that there's a 15-degree gain. So this is something we would never have noticed. So typical operation of the space, everything feels right, we're happy. But now we notice there's 50 degrees, so we found a major waste of energy within this collection space that we could rectify. This is something that just turned out to be what they call open plenum. The air in the space gets pulled up into the ceiling and returned back to the air handling unit through just in the open ceiling of the space. And in that open plenum, the sun shining down on the roof heated up that ceiling space and was adding to that 15 degrees. By just simply ducting that air back to the unit, we were able to significantly reduce this huge energy waste within this space. So here's something that most of you, I'm assuming, have within your collection. So we have windows within a collection space. This is a library collection. They had windows in their space. We were curious to see how much of an impact those windows played on the collection. The green arrow you see here is where I actually put my data logger. Didn't put it on the windowsill. Kept it a few feet away, but I wanted to keep it where the collection lives and what the collection was experiencing. I wanted to see what was happening, just adjacent to the windows where the books were. If you're ready. So this is New York City. This is if you look, we're in February to April. So we're in cold months. We're not even in the hot months. Not not August or June. This is February to April. And just in that window area, I'm pulling down temperatures in 85 to in some cases over 100 degrees. And the swings would start 10 o'clock. It was a east-facing window. They would start at 10 o'clock and they'd be over by noon. So just in the time that the sun crested that window, we would have this heat load. Collected this data. They were able to cover the windows, which is why you see it start to taper down. This is as the work's going on to cover those windows as we go on. But you also see that the two other loggers on this floor are not even bothered by what's happening. This is a localized event. Similarly, our relative humidity, if you increase the temperature, we expect the relative humidity to drop, just a natural, they act opposite of each other. In this scenario, with those giant kick-ups of temperature, we were seeing the relative humidity in the space climb as well. And it was a result of the books in the immediate area were dumping their moisture to try and compensate for this. So it's a good eye-opening experience, if you will, to really see what's happening just in that general area where the windows are. So one last poll here I'm going to throw out to everyone. Before we go into some of the energy saving strategies, what energy saving strategy may you implement within your institution? We got our nightly shutdowns, daily setbacks, seasonal setbacks, some lighting adjustments, or if you know of any others, some that we haven't mentioned, or some you may have created on your own. All right. Keep that and I'll share the results with everybody. So this gives an idea. So I see a lot of people doing lighting adjustments. That's great. A couple doing shutdowns, setbacks, a few doing none, which is nothing to be ashamed of. Some systems are not capable of actually performing energy saving strategies. Just going to go through a few strategies here that we have. When you're looking at picking your strategy, remember every strategy poses a potential risk. Recognizing the risk of each strategy is very important. Most of the time when we look at the risks outside of lighting adjustments, the strategies are really limitations of the mechanical system or even age of equipment. We have seen people, institutions try and implement some shutdowns and they let the magic smoke out of a component, whether it's a motor or a drive. And it does happen. It has nothing to do with the strategy as much as it's just an older piece of equipment that just failed at that point in time. Strategies can be based on your cumulative knowledge. All that you've built up between recognizing what's up with your facility, what are the limitations of your collection, what's the mechanical system limitations. So now that we know all that, what can we do? What are the strategies that we can implement? One of the best things you can, or you may have accidentally acquired, may be some shutdown information. If you've ever had a power outage, for any kind, whether it's a storm or just a localized power outage, having that data and identifying how long your building responded to those outages can be significant. And a number of these strategies are limited by VMS systems. So if you don't have a building management system, a computer that controls your HVAC components, you might be eliminated just because of that. I'll start with shutdowns, museum shutdown, or this is an example of a museum shutdown. Just turning the mechanical system off for an 8-hour test, it was able to save 1/3 of the energy within this institution. After some testing, we were able to bump that up to 12 hours. So I'll give you an example of their data. So the red line is the mechanical system logger that is on to show where the actual shutdowns were occurring. So this is showing us where those 12-hour shutdowns actively were occurring. And the teal line or the bluish line under there, that's showing us the space data. So the space really didn't change from about 65 degrees, maybe 2 to 3 degrees at the most. But really the space did not change in those 12-hour periods. So the RH didn't change at all. So can we control during shutdowns? We absolutely can. There's, depending on the limitations and abilities of your space. Daily set point change. There's another energy saving strategy that we implement. This is in a library. They were originally implementing 68 degrees and 40% year round, no changes whatsoever. So 68, we worked with them to go 68 degrees during the day and 62 at night. Lowering that temperature a bit reduces the need to humidify as much. So we're actually reducing energy twofold, once the reheating and the humidification. So here's that example. So we have that reheat data. So the up on this graph is where they were heating before, and the down is with their reduction, where they were when the system was backed off. So it shows the amount of energy that they were able to save in that respect for the time period. It's a small energy savings and a small a gain in the preservation of the space, but that small energy savings is cumulative over time. Also seasonal set point change. So here's the museum example. Temperature and relative humidity was 72 degrees and 50% year round. So we worked with them on just lowering it 4 degrees and 10%, saves a little bit of reheat and a little bit of humidification energy. And it's a very high occupancy museum. There's tons of traffic throughout this space. And they implemented even with the daily setbacks as well. They went, they have their seasonal as well as their daily for both winter and summer. And here, their graph. So you could see that their occupancy was so high that even when they went to 68, there were so many people in there that they still were achieving almost 72 degrees anyway in the wintertime with a lower condition. So their mechanical system was almost in an idle point during those times because it wasn't needing to turn on and heat to 68 or do much work other than that. One of the last strategies I have here is fan speeds. It's adjusting or reducing the fan speed when occupancy is smaller, as there's less of demand. If you're in a library space, and you're especially on a university campus, you're open 24/7. During the day, you may have a few hundred students or 1,000 within your library. In the evening, you may have 12. And do you need to move the same volume of air for those 12 or for those 12 that you did for the hundreds, or can you reduce that? And we can actually, reducing fan speeds can save significant amount of money through a mechanical system. It's what's called the Affinity Law. There is not a one-to-one relationship. If we're looking at the airflow, which is green, which is what we want to achieve, 50% of that airflow is not achieved through 50% horsepower. So if we want to achieve, excuse me, a 50% airflow, if we're looking at this graph, 50% airflow here, we're looking at 13% of the horsepower that's needed. So we can get significant airflow by really cutting back on the horsepower that we're using. So it's a good way to cut down on the energy when we can't shut the system down, but we can back down. And you can piggyback the fan speed adjustments with nightly setbacks and temperature setbacks as well to get a little bit extra savings, kind of add on to what you're saving for your space. And again, they call it the Affinity Law. It's a cubic relationship between horsepower and airflow. Some additional resources wrapping up here. There's the Energy Star Treasure Hunt, just a ways to go and find little things around your institution that may be ways to save energy, possibly unplugging some items that use energy, certain types of lighting or certain equipment that you can reduce consumption on that can help add up. They try to make it fun, which is why they call it their Energy Star Treasure Hunt. Another Energy Star program is the monitoring, setting up an Energy Star portfolio. You could save up to about 7% by setting up these programs. It's a benchmark. It can be a benchmarking tool to measure and compare your building's efficiency to similar buildings, but can also compare to other facilities like competitors, if you will, like other libraries in your area, other institutions in your area of similar size. And Energy Star does the top 25 percentile earn an Energy Star label for their building for that year. So it's good. It's kind of a good PR thing to say, hey, we won this. And one of the last arguments I can give you, if you want to make that argument to change a mechanical system, to push to get an adjustment, to push to make changes, this is what we call making the green argument. And I use this at home with my kids all the time for why they should turn lights off, but it's a way to really drive home what you're looking at. So 1 watt-hour is the equivalent to that much, that many tons or pounds of carbon that we're showing there. And it takes a mature tree to absorb 48 pounds of carbon in 1 year. In 1 year, a mature tree only absorbs 48 pounds of carbon dioxide. So if we're looking at just a simple example, a 13-watt bulb that's left on for 100 days straight is going to emit or be responsible for 48 pounds of carbon. So it would take 1 mature tree to absorb the carbon dioxide from that 1 13-watt light bulb being on. And granted, this is not the exact argument you want to use, but working with your facility team, build a plan. We can save 200,000 watts by changing X, Y, or Z, or changing this mechanical system, making this adjustment. And through that argument, you can then go to administration and say, hey, this is our plan. We can reduce the facility's reliance on, 80 trees this year. And, it's a good selling point. A lot of institutions look at that, what's the green payback? And that's the green payback that they could use even with marketing to try and find funders for that project. If you're interested in working with us, we have a range of services, the sustainability and resilience services, data analysis, film storage. We do offer mechanical system assessment analysis. So if you want your mechanical system looked at or you have questions, we can do that. If you're looking at a new facility, we do mechanical system design consultations. We can help you, and preservation commissioning, so we can help you make sure it's right in the beginning or, before you get to a point where there may be a problem. But I do want to thank everyone for listening. I promise I'll stop talking to answer questions now. But if before I do so, I want to let you know, if you ever are looking at data, if you have questions, if you're just looking at something in your facility that doesn't make sense, I'm always available. Please feel free to reach out to me. Happy to talk to anybody and try and even look at your data if you see an anomaly. happy to try and get to the bottom. Sometimes it drives Kelly crazy because I like trying to solve whatever is out there. So I'll open the floor to any questions.
Thank you so much, Christopher. This has been a really informative presentation. We now have time for a couple questions. So if you have not yet done so, please type your questions into the Q&A box. So our first question is, we are an academic music library and we have a storage room in which we keep some of our special collections, including a few instruments, a lot of books, scores, and some AV media. What is the best relative humidity for such a room? We keep a dehumidifier in this room and monitor a hygrometer.
I would have to, I'm sorry to pull that, but I was gonna say, I would be more comfortable running that by Kelly, who's on our collection side. We like to keep the relative humidity in check. I would say not exceeding, because there are probably metals in there, 55% relative humidity and not going too low. But not knowing all the items in that space, I would have to kind of say, if you want to reach out to me and let me know what types of collection materials you have in there, like specifically types of instruments in that. Kelly and I can kind of give you a ballpark what we think would be the best for that space, because it all would come down to the individual types of materials, the composites that may be in there, what types of instruments are metals and woods and everything considered.
And our next question is, could you tell us what model FLIR you use? There seems to be several of them.
There are several of them. I believe, hang on one second, I can grab it out of my cupboard. I want to say it's the more recent, and I don't know if it has it on there, and of course it doesn't. The C5 was what we currently use. We have 5 of them on hand from our previous grant. And they're wonderful. We also had the phone ones that plug in the bottom of the phone, and couldn't recommend even just using an IR camera, not even a specific brand, but using an IR camera in general. They're huge lifesavers to identify issues within your institution.
Okay, and we have time for just one more question. Have you worked with any institution that is testing daily or seasonal shutdowns in high density library storage facilities?
Yes, we actually have. We've tested them in everything from small institutions to some large storage facilities. So we've kind of gone all over the map with them. If you have data or you have questions, I'm happy to take a look at whatever you may have, or help you out or give you some guidance, or offer whatever I can. But it's definitely, we have kind of gone all across the map. When we tested the shutdowns, we tried to do high density, some low density, stack storage spaces. We kind of made sure we've gone a wide variety of spaces so we get a good idea of what could and wouldn't work. And usually it's not the collection as much at the end of the day as it's the building and the mechanical system design.
Great, thank you so much. We do have some remaining questions that were submitted, and our presenter has kindly offered to answer them in writing, and those answers will be sent out via email. We are so glad you can join us today, and you'll soon receive a short online evaluation form, so please take a few minutes to respond. Your comments are very valuable and help the core Continuing Education Committee plan future events. The email will also include links to today's slides and recordings. Thanks again to our presenter, Christopher Cameron, and thanks also to the members of the core Continuing Education Committee, our technical support, Joseph Nicholson, core office staff, Julie Reese, Brooke Morris-Chott, Tom Farron, and Mia Blick-Sheehan from the core office. The support they provide makes it possible for us to present these webinars. ALA Core is seeking new members. Join Core for access to past webinars and many other benefits. Visit ala.org/core for more information on membership. Core has other continuing education events coming up. The next Preservation Week webinar will be Thursday, April 28th on digital preservation's impact on the environment. Please see the Core website to register or find more information on this and other upcoming webinars. And to learn more about Preservation Week, please visit preservationweek.org. Core offers web courses, which are 4 to 6 weeks long. The next two courses will cover fundamentals of preservation and fundamentals of digital library projects. CORE also offers 2-day e-forum email discussions and a new classroom series of workshops. The next e-forum will be May 17th and 18th on giving the one shot your best shot, making the most of one-shot instruction. So thank you all for joining us today, and this concludes our session.